Hello, my name is Rob, and welcome to Directors Uncut. If this is your first episode, we put filmmakers from all corners of the globe onto a huge list that covers everything from so bad it's good camp to so good it's good classics. Oh, one take. Excellent.
Nice, yeah.
And then we turn into a lottery of directors by using a random number generator to pick a name out of the hat. Whatever name comes out, I am joined by a rotating cast of guest hosts discuss them and their work through two films. This week I have been joined by Ygraine from What a Scream podcast. Hello.
Hi.
It's great to have you on the Proper podcast. You were on the 2021 review episode, which feels like about
a year ago.
Yeah,
it feels longer than that.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Time's a flat circle and all that. And Graham from the Pop Screen podcast.
Hello.
I've done too many podcasts. Ask how you are. Yes, we do lots of podcasts together, but just for the sake of balance, how are you, Graham?
I'm great. I've got, I think, a milder cold than Ygraine, so that's nice. And yeah, I've just watched some grotty South Korean serial killer movies, which has been more fun than it sounds.
Well, yes, you sort of segued nicely from me there. We came with Na Hong-Jin, which might not sound like a name which pops off the screen by name alone. So he's better known as the guy who has done The Chaser, Yellow Sea. I'm saying better known for, I'm just basically naming his filmography now. And The Wailing. So this is a very precise question here because I can't sort of bamboozle you by saying, so how did you hear of one of these tent poles of cinema history? It's small filmography. Very easy question.
Yeah,
so,
probably. I'm going to make this as personal as I can get because, as you pointed out, there is no anecdote I can tell about like staying up after my bedtime when I was 8 years old or whatever. I first found out about Na Hong-Jin back when we were doing the Cinema Eclectica podcasts. And on our Best of 2016 show, you were talking about a film called The Wailing, Rob, and you were absolutely raving about it. And I thought it sounded really interesting. I filed it away in my memory, and I first watched it, would have been a couple of years back, I think, maybe 2020. I watched it for Letterboxd's 30 Countries in 30 Days challenge. But that's all I've seen so far. Until now.
Ygraine?
I came to Na Hong-Jin through his work with The Medium. So he co-wrote it and produced it. And then I remember chatting about it with a few people and they were like, well, if you like that, then check out The Wailing. So it's literally only this year that I watched The Wailing for the first time. And that is all I've kind of got from him so far, apart from when you were like, hey, let's do this episode. I thought I'd put my name down for him. Because it's always been that thing, when you're like, okay, I must check out this other director's stuff. But because you've got such a massive watch pile when you're in this business, it kind of keeps getting pushed. But finally, I had an excuse to watch some of his other stuff, as well as his short films as well.
Oh, you've set that up now. You can't just drop that and then sort of shit past it. What are his short films like? I've not seen any of those.
So I watched, oh God, it's got a really long title that I am not going to remember unless I look it up. It is called A Perfect Red Snapper Dish, which he released in 2005. And it was awarded like the best extreme film at some award film festival, and it's quite interesting. It's quite funny, which is what a lot of Korean directors and screenwriters are great at doing, is bringing the humor into darkness. And then he does another one called Sweat, which is a really strange kind of play of different situations where humans sweat. Basically, it's like an elongated music video with a lot of sweaty people in it. But I can appreciate it for what it is.
I don't know how to preach that. It's short about sweating.
I mean, you have to. It's got that typical Korean sensibility that you're like, if this was done by any other director, you'd be like, what the F is this? But because it's someone like Na Hong-Jin, you're like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I can see this.
Day at the office for Na Hong-Jin.
Yeah.
Well, I've been grossed out by a short film by Scorsese about shaving, so
yes,
why not about Na Hong-Jin with sweating?
Yeah.
It's on brand with something, I guess.
Have you seen that Martin Scorsese's a really big Derry Girls fan?
Yeah, I saw that today, yeah.
Yeah, I think since we're recording quite close to the deadline, I just wanted to throw that in there because it's brought me so much joy.
I mean, who isn't a big fan of the Derry Girls?
There is that.
I've not seen any yet, to be honest.
Oh my God.
Like you said earlier about the pile of all these TV shows you're supposed to watch, and Derry Girls is just another one to pop on that list.
But this is so nice because it's short and it's just so joyful. I love it.
And it's Scorsese approved now.
Exactly. Now you have to watch it.
I mean, okay, I've been told. So of the two movies today, we're doing 2008's The Chaser and 2016's The Wailing. I think I've got those dates right. So which one do the two of you want to tackle first?
Hailed by critics, this year's international box office sensation, The Chaser, is being remade by the team that brought you The Departed. But there's only ever one original.
Okay, so who has a synopsis for The Chaser? And I realise this is a loaded question when it comes to Korean movies because they're kind of very agile, I guess, in a way.
I don't, because I'd forgotten we do synopses and now I'm having a panic attack, so please don't lean on me.
Okay.
I can do it if you'd like.
Please.
So we have this he's an ex-detective, kind of disgraced cop who has decided to take on the career of being a pimp, as you do when you're an ex-cop. And this guy Jung Ho, his girls are going missing, and he believes that they're being trafficked, and so he sends Mi Jin out to this customer, and then he realizes that she as well has gone missing. And so it's basically, this whole film is a chase between him and this serial killer who is based on a real life Korean serial killer. And it's set out in a really interesting way that you wouldn't really expect from a typical serial killer cop procedural. We are presented with the killer from the get-go, and it's all about pretty much how is Jung Ho going to prove and get to the bottom of this mystery, basically.
And the big trick it pulls, I think, which is so unexpected, is what you expect to be the ending actually happens half an hour in.
Yes.
I don't even know how to really process that as sort of a storytelling practice, because it's so brave, I guess. I mean, the one thing you describe police procedurals, I know that's not what this is, but it's just a vague term that works. They're all exactly the same. And this just throws the entire rule book out and just goes at it, and it feels so fresh because of that.
Yeah.
I think part of what's happening in here is just a sort of one-upmanship with Seven, which is still, visibly a huge influence on a movie like this, even in 2008. And Seven famously has the killer turn themselves in at the end of Act 2. And was it Andrew Kevin Walker who wrote that? He said when he was shopping it around and he was trying to summarize it for the log lines, everyone was like, well, where do you go from there? That's the end of the film. And of course, there's still the massive thing left. So it's almost like one-upping Seven, isn't it? We're going to have that happen. Not that he turns himself in, but we're going to reveal him half an hour in. And then there's still tons of stuff that's happening.
Yeah. And you don't really get any answers for him, really, do you? With John Doe, you kind of understand him to an extent.
He's got a project, yeah.
But the killer in this, he just seems bored, honestly.
I think that's what makes him such a great killer, though, because when you can understand a killer, you're kind of like, meh. But when you see this almost perfect portrayal of evil, it makes it more interesting and more twisted, because you as a human cannot see their thought path. So, I mean, we're given lots of he performed a lobotomy on his nephew, a couple of years ago, and he worked in a church on statues, and it's all very disjointed. His past life is very disjointed. I mean, we do get the typical kind of, other sex workers that have gone to him have said that he's impotent, and that is a typical thing for a serial killer to start killing for. But because his life and his raison d'etre is so fragmented, I think it just makes a really good twisted killer.
Yeah, I agree. I think the scene that I loved the most, particularly from that perspective, is when they send him to the police psychiatrist, who is full of these really glib answers, like saying, also the chisel you use, that's like metaphorically your penis, isn't it? It's the implement you use against women, and he's just rolling his eyes at all of these cliches. I think that's the very South Korean like shaft of dark humor in the movie, but it does also make him more frightening. You realize that maybe there isn't a reason why he's doing this. Maybe, like you say, he is just bored and this is just a game for him.
It does scan, because just his general demeanour. An older couple turn up at the door saying, "That's our dog." And instead of solving the situation, he's like, "All right, I'll kill them and take the car." It's like he knows he's going to get caught, so he just does it anyway. And where they find the bodies as well, he's put no thought into anything. It's just, I think that's probably the best explanation. He is probably just bored.
Yeah, I mean, they even say we've got like the police unit are like, well, he couldn't have hidden it in his backyard garden. That would be too simple. It must be on the only mountain in this town. And it turns out that no, he just buried it in his back garden. Like, it's not, he's not looking to be a mastermind or anything. He just wants to kill.
It is very much scary. I think that is a philosophy for him.
It's like, I mean, to take it back to the sort of Hollywood films that I think this is in conversation with, the scariest moment of Hannibal Lecter's screen career is, I can't remember whether it's in Manhunter or Silence of the Lambs, but I think it's in Manhunter, where Will Graham asks him what his childhood was like, and he just says it was ordinary. I just grew up in a suburban house and I had a nice parents, and that was it. And the idea that there isn't, some great horror hidden in his history that turned him into something this evil is more frightening than what Thomas Harris later wrote, where it turned out that actually every single bad thing that could happen to someone happened to Hannibal Lecter in his childhood, and it becomes more understandable and less monstrous, I guess, in the classical sense. Monstrous in the sense that this is something that isn't quite human and you can't understand in human terms.
I don't think he'd work without a good foil, a good opposite number law. And the pimp is, well, in this sort of role, typically hard-boiled at a push, but at least they'd be likeable. There'd be someone that you want to see succeed. And I think that role isn't filled by his foil, the pimp. It's filled by everybody else that's around him, basically. One theme which I popped up watching these two close together is Na Hong-Jin is a sucker for his father-daughter surrogate relationships.
Yes.
Because that is sort of the heart of this movie, is this little girl that's following this abhorrent pimp around. We introduced to him his assistant in the subtitles that I watched anyway, at least. He calls his assistant Meathead. And he turns up to an event, what am I talking about? It's not an event. Booking one of his girls, and they tried to basically take photos of her, and she took objection to it. And he just beat him up, basically. Slaps him about a bit. So he's established as this horrible piece of shit. But it's the little girl that he has near him, and it's her mother who's sort of the MacGuffin, as it were, which is the real heart of this, which is, again, a bit of an ambitious move, really, I think.
Yeah, I kind of wish there'd been a bit more of that, because when it is, as you say, treating the mother as kind of a MacGuffin, that was when it felt like I was reminded that this was made during an era of horror that I don't care much for, where it's like every single horror movie of the 2000s has to end up in the same grimy basement. And I had not missed seeing that grimy basement on screen. But when it is the pimp and the kid, that is a real kind of weird, odd couple relationship, the sort of thing that you could imagine being in a really good Takeshi Kitano film, perhaps. And I wished there'd been a little bit more of that, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely his redemption arc, wasn't it? I mean, even though he is presented as a bit of a piece of shit, I kind of liked him because he wasn't presented as like this tough as nails kind of, no shit taken kind of weird action star that you'd expect perhaps from a Hollywood. Yeah. The thing with Korean cinema, especially with horror and thrillers, is they really base everything around the characters and how the characters react to situations. And they bring emotions to characters that you wouldn't really expect to kind of have an emotional tie to. And I kind of like that he was a little bit slapstick, which again is another thing of Korean cinema, is they do love a good bit of slapstick, even when it's like the most horrific thing ever. And I do like this redemption arc, but I like that it wasn't too concentrated on it, because maybe it's just me. I'm kind of like, I don't care. I just want to get to the action. I'm very much an action person. But I do like the kind of slither they had of like, he feels like shit because the woman who went out to this John was like, I can't go, I'm really sick. And he's like, well, you better get out there. So he's obviously suffering from guilt because now she has a child, and he's kind of taking on that guilt, and he's got to have this redemption arc, which I kind of liked. But yeah, I thought it was the perfect amount of like this weird buddy cop style.
She's a great little girl as well, though. She's
great. Yeah.
Such a spunky little character who completely hands him his ass on multiple occasions and questions his entire way of working. Which is
I love
lovely.
when she's talking about Rio de Janeiro, and she says like, it's the old capital of Brazil, as if she's absolutely disgusted that an adult doesn't know that. I think that's great.
Yeah, and she does break your heart as well in one scene, but yeah, it leaves some bits to the imagination, I think. Very violent though, is it not?
Certainly, yeah.
It's that style. It's that style of violence that I think Korea does really well. It's not slick. It's not everything is perfect. It's clumsy and dirty and very, very bloody. Not in the sort of hyper stylized blood spraying everywhere. It's just the one.
There is a bit of that, isn't there? There is a bit of it where it's in that kind of sort of, I guess, Peckinpah derived mode, where it's the slow-mo blood splatter going everywhere.
And it's a horrible moment as well, but generally it's just that sort of grimy violence. It's sort of violence what looks like it hurts. It's not the violence which is so flighty and of a different reality that it may as well be.
It's not 12A.
It's Evil Dead's pencil in the apple rather than Zatoichi and arms cut off and there's like a hose of blood going everywhere.
Yes.
I think that's a better way to describe it.
Yeah, I kind of like how subtle you could say, the blood spurting everywhere, but I really love the shots he showed of the hammer coming down and you could see clumps of hair stuck to it.
Yeah.
Like those are the shots where you're like, holy shit, this looks real. And the griminess, I just feel like that's what it would be like. I mean, as I said, it's based on a true-ish serial killer. And you can just imagine that this is exactly what it looked like. And, when you see stuff that's too slick, it takes you out of it. Whereas I think in this, it was like, because of those little moments where your focus is so brought on something as small as hair stuck on a hammer, it just, it keeps you enveloped in the moment.
Yeah. I'm really distraught that I didn't know that this was like inspired by a true serial killer case, by the way, because as anyone who's heard our Toshiada Toyoda episode knows, I can bore on about true crime cases like no one else, and I just feel like I've let the side down by not knowing this.
That was a Unabomber one, if I remember correctly.
It was, yeah. Oh boy, can I talk about the Unabomber.
This one is based on Yu Young-chul, who is actually, there is a thing on Netflix, a documentary on Netflix. I think it's called The Raincoat Killer. And that's who this is. So he murdered loads of sex workers and old women. And he ate some of them. And yeah, that was basically what this film is based on.
Right.
The idea that this movie is a toned down version of a true story.
Yes.
You're like, this is the PG version of this.
That's quite incredible. But I mean, I love this movie. I think it's it kind of give me hope to believe that serial killer movies can be good again, because they became so obvious. So sort of a studio clean. But I think the TV police procedural is a big role to play in that. But all those TV shows, all those NCISs, CSIs, whatever they are, Law and Orders, just kind of totally took the wind out of that style of storytelling sales, really, in this.
Yeah.
It just does not care. It's just so ferocious, and I kind of love it for that.
Yeah. One thing I do want to bring up that is also apparent is obviously Na Hong-Jin has very little respect for law and police, and he thinks they're a bunch of gobshites, which, again, like, I hate being like, this is another characteristic of, but a lot of times in Korean horror thrillers, authority figures are seen as these dumbasses who, like, cannot get anything right, who completely mess everything up. And I just loved the way that he was kind of like, you know, we've got this side storyline of like the mayor of Seoul got shite thrown in his face. And that's what the police are focused on. And that is how they let this killer go. And he goes on. And this is such, like, you've heard this story a billion times in loads of different countries. And I just love the way that Hong-Jin is really doing a commentary on how much law and police forces really fail marginalized communities like sex workers and like women, but all wrapped up in a comedic kind of parcel.
I forgot about it's literally a guy who threw a shit at the mayor. He's not subtle with it, is he?
Yeah, I think stylistically it's interesting because I'd associated that brand of South Korean kind of extreme crime / horror cinemas with directors like Park Chan-wook, who's obviously visually really painstaking. This is more casual. I think in terms of the colour palette and things like that, it's a very beautiful film, but it's shot very handheld. There's a kind of casual immediacy to it that I thought was really interesting and not at all what I expected.
It has a feeling like a lot of J-horror. J-horror had a sort of like drains, sort of shot in digital, lots of blues and just quite grim colour palette.
Yeah. A lot of desaturation as well. I like the way it's kind of accessible. Like you mentioned, Park Chan-wook, and even stuff like A Tale of Two Sisters. It's all very beautiful and very symbolic. Whereas I feel that even with The Wailing, and even with his shorts, even with something as out there as Sweat, it's all very accessible. You don't have to sit there and analyze it. It's very, you take it. I mean, you can analyze it, but it's very, you take it as it comes. And I really appreciate that, because as someone who has the attention span of a goldfish, when you have a film that's 2 hours long, it can get very tough going. But I didn't find myself failing too much with my attention span on this. And I just think that speaks to his accessibility to not only Korean audiences, but audiences that perhaps wouldn't be used to Korean cinema.
I maybe did find it a bit too straightforward, but I think that's partly because of what I'm comparing it to, which we'll get onto next.
But just to close out on the chase, any sort of things that we haven't touched upon that you're burrowing a hole in your head with a really long drill, like it's a Brian De Palma movie. It's
like
subtle.
It's a metaphor for a penis, yes.
That was a Body Double that I'm thinking of, isn't it? With the huge mega drill. It was being subtle.
Yes.
So anything that's anything left with the chase that you'd like to mention?
Just the fact that it was his first feature-length film. And it was like one of the most successful Korean films of that year.
I didn't realise that, actually. Yeah. I didn't know it was his first.
And it doesn't look like it. Like, no. It's not one of like a naive kind of director or someone that's been like, oh, I've got to be cautious because this is my first film. I mean, he's really gone balls to the wall, and I appreciate that.
All I wish is for you to sit and talk with me. Here.
Yes.
I prefer to stand.
Silence! Or stand. As you wish. It is enough that we are alone together. Just the two of us. Some simple conversation.
I have nothing to talk about. You've stolen my dreams away.
All things change, lady. The dreams of youth are the regrets of maturity. Dreams are my speciality. Through dreams, I influence mankind. My dream is of eternity with you.
So, we will be picking who is coming up on a future episode of the podcast.
Yes.
On our...
Is this where I kind of cross my fingers and go, Lloyd Cowley, Lloyd Cowley, Lloyd Cowley?
Sacrifice something as well, that might help you gods. I don't know.
Sacrifice 3/4 of the list. We might get there.
So 460, the next director is going to be, random number generator has picked number 344. That's 344.
Oh, right, there's a lot to pick from here. Again, I hate to add to your workload, but I think this could be another two-parter. It's Ridley Scott.
Oh, wow, really? Okay.
Yeah.
That hack.
Okay, so that's Ben signed up for it. Who else?
Well, he's a curious creature, isn't he? Because he's either an absolute genius or an idiot who can't put any movie together.
And yet you say that.
He's never one. He's always one or the other. There's no middle ground with him.
And yet he's done so many films that really, really work, that fly so far under the radar that you kind of go, oh, was that Ridley Scott? I mean, one that immediately comes to mind is Matchstick Men.
I love Matchstick Men. Yeah, that does not get enough love. Yeah,
Matchstick Men is fantastic. It doesn't at all, and it's one of those completely flies under the radar. And I remember watching it thinking, this is fantastic. And you know what? If that had been a first-time director, people would have been raving about it. But yet that, because it was him, and then he did that, was it A Year in Provence as well?
Oh, Good Year, yeah.
Yes, yeah, Good Year. There you go. That was it. I knew it was something like that. But you're right. He kind of, but he's not afraid. He's not hampered by his own legacy. He's not one of these directors who will sit there and go, "Oh, well, I made Blade Runner, so I'm important enough." You know, like a certain Mr. Nolan who likes to go up and blow up places.
I think in terms of like deep cuts, there's two more recent Scott films that I would throw forward, because obviously, yeah, Blade Runner, Alien is close to a perfect film as anything I've ever seen, but in terms of deep cuts, I really enjoyed All the Money in the World. I think largely because the situation with the release of that, where famously they replaced Kevin Spacey with Christopher Plummer, basically allowed Ridley Scott to make a director's cut before the actual cut came out, and you think, well, that's what you're invested in now. So I really enjoyed that. I also think if you want to have a big argument on a podcast, do The Counselor, Rob. I dare you. Do The Counselor.
Just for clarity there, I hated it, Graham loves it, so...
I do, yeah. Because my forever joke with, like, action movies and thrillers with a one-word title is that the lead counsellor is always called Jeff, and then there's, you know, in Commando, Arnold Schwarzenegger is Jeff Commando, but it's in The Counselor, it's even stupider than my running stupid joke, because Michael Fassbender's character is just called The Counselor. He's not even Jeff Counselor. Yeah,
just to find some of his outliers, but Legend is an odd movie.
Interesting choice, yeah.
I'm going to throw one in there, and this is a film I adored growing up. So it was sort of like one of the first films that I remember thinking, I want to get into more of these kind of things, and that's Black Rain.
Yeah.
Michael Douglas is such a good movie.
That has a very well-regarded Japanese movie actor, whose stuff is very hard to find, Yusaku Matsuda. One of these actors who died probably a bit young.
Right. Yeah, and Kenta Takakura as well is in it as well, and he's fantastic.
G.I. Jane, that's not particularly well thought of. Kingdom of Heaven, one of these. It is many cuts era, that one.
Yes,
I was going to say G.I. Jane. Are we going to be looking to get Will Smith on for that one?
He's done all sorts. Thelma and Louise.
Thelma and Louise, I want to say my hottest Ridley Scott take is if Alien did not exist, his best film would be Thelma and Louise.
I've seen it in a long time.
Loved Blade Runner, but
and also
I love that more.
He's double twofer of his recent ones. Lady Gaga as a Russian in House of Gucci.
That wasn't a Russian, that was an Italian. The accent is so bad you can't tell.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And The Last Duel, which he had a pop at everybody for having low attention spans.
Yes. My favourite joke about House of Gucci is that Adam Driver is the only person in that cast who hasn't based their performance on Wario.
That's a very good. Okay, so Ridley Scott, that should be interesting.
Lots of possibilities there. But give Jeff Counselor a go, Rob. You might like him second time
It's
round.
not my decision to make. It's the people who have put their name down for Ridley Scott, and if they want to do the Counselor, I have no choice.
나아가 이제까지 본 악질 중에서 갑 중에 갑이요.
요새 자꾸 동네에서 사람 죽어나가는 거 싹 다 그 일본 양반이 오나 생긴 일들아뇨.
Okay, so that takes us to the second movie of the night, which is his last directed movie. He's produced and wrote The Medium since then. But the Wailing, which is another movie with a plot, isn't it? It certainly goes all over the place, this one. But in its simplest essence, we're in a rural part of Korea, and there's a spate of murderings happening around the town where it seems like that a family member is turning on their entire family and murdering them brutally. They'll have mushrooms or some type of fauna, isn't it, on their body. And the only thing that's really different is there's a Japanese guy who's moved into town, and he's suspicious because he's Japanese. That's as far as it takes it for a little while, and the story really grows. Really, there's a epidemic of murder cases. It touches upon supernatural elements. It's folk horror and religious horror. It darts about.
Well, yeah. I mean, I want to dig into that personally a bit, but the first thing I want to say is there is a trend now of horror movies going way over the 2-hour mark, and it is mostly a trend which I hate. Mostly a trend that I hate, with one shining exception. I don't think anyone could possibly say this movie doesn't use its 2.5-hour runtime to the fullest extent.
Yeah, I've always been of the opinion that unless someone's going to Mordor, then a film shouldn't be over 2 hours. I really struggle. I struggled with this the first time I watched it. I think I watched it in about 4 parts. I rewatched it today and I managed to get through it with a few breaks. But yeah, I mean, it really does use its running time, like you said. And it kind of cuts it up between, again, a police investigation by some completely incompetent law authority. And then it goes, what can we throw at the wall and see what sticks? Is it going to be demons? Is it going to be ghosts? Is it going to be zombies? Who knows? Let's see. But I appreciate him throwing everything in there.
Yeah, I think that part of the whodunit in this, because as we said, the chaser isn't really a whodunit. It reveals its killer straight away. This is more of a whodunit in that there is a question mark over who is actually responsible for all these horrific acts. But the real mystery in it is, what kind of horror movie is this going to be? Is it a folk horror? Is it a ghost horror? As Ygraine said, there is a moment in it where it seems poised to become a zombie movie. And I think you could keep going for a very long time without figuring out what kind of horror movie it ends up being.
Just to throw it in there too, it's also a dance horror. That's a new thing, thanks to the most recent version of Suspiria.
Yes, of course. Actually, yeah, now you mention it, that's another 2.5 hour horror, which I thought was justifiable, but yes.
Great final 30 minutes, but well, it made you work to get there. But yeah, I mean, just because I mentioned it, I think this is possibly, it's a rich history of exorcism scenes in cinema history.
Yeah.
I still think this is my favourite because it's so theatrical. Because essentially there's a shaman and he has this routine, which is lots of tribal drumming. He cuts the throat of chickens. Also, in the Prime, which I watched this on, it says no animals were hurt in the making of this. So that's a thumb up for it. But yeah, this entire procedure that he does to exorcise the demons or whatever it might be, it's unlike anything you've ever seen, really. It's so striking.
And it's true, because I remember for a very long time making a movie about exorcists was like making a movie about a newspaper baron with a missing sledge. You know, you're not going to make the best one, so you might as well not try. But yeah, I think now, decades on from William Friedkin's film, I think I would agree Na Hong-Jin has done something really new and superb with a filmed exorcism scene.
Possession is my absolute favourite subgenre of horror. And the thing I really love about this is how he marries this East Asian demon tradition with traditional Western ideals of demons and devils. So we've got the goats, we have the typical horned, red-eyed creature, as well as using the shamanic rural belief system. And he's married the two so well that you almost don't notice it until you start looking at, the goat that's hung up, and you start realizing that he's just done this amazing relationship with these two. And again, like The Chaser, he's made it really accessible for people who aren't Korean and perhaps don't know about rural Korea, by marrying these two kind of belief systems.
Yeah, I find all of that stuff about the shamanism and the mushrooms and things like that so compelling. It is absolutely my jam, and I think there's a school of thought that any serial killer story is about the society that the serial killer operates in. And that's certainly true of The Chaser, but it's true in an absolutely extraordinary, unprecedented way with The Wailing, which on paper is just a catalogue of insane supernatural things happening. But in practice, it has so much to say about the sort of town versus country divide, about xenophobia, about the way that these older traditions can stay alive under the cover of modernity. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, it's very much folk horror at its heart.
Yeah.
And as well, with a lot of folk horrors, there is this kind of question of colonialism at its root. And if we know about the Korean history, with its invasion by the Japanese, Korea, South Korea, and Korea as a whole was still under Japanese rule until 1945. And so with this in mind, you can you're almost given, the answer to the mystery of this. We have this Japanese stranger, and even though it kind of flips between, well, is it xenophobia? Is it just racism? When we know Korea's history, we're kind of like, oh no, this is the answer. This is what it is. And that is true of like a lot of folk history and folk horror as well. Even when we look at stuff like The Wicker Man, that is about Scottish kind of, or other sort of islands that aren't England being taken over by England and being, brought to how the English should have. Sorry, I know. You're both,
It's not directors uncut for a reason. Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true, though, and it's one of the things that I find so rewarding about folk horror is that it really hits you where you live. There is no way that an English person can watch The Wicker Man or Pender's Fen without feeling like you're being a little implicated in this. And I think there's something similar in The Wailing. You don't fully believe that this Japanese guy is going to be responsible because you can't believe that the film's going to endorse such full-on over-the-top xenophobia, but it really enjoys playing with that and making you think, why do you think I'm going to play nice about this? Why do you think I'm not going to go there?
It's really interesting at the destination it arrives to. It does set up the star to be this thing about Korean racism, but its conclusion is so inconclusive. It's like, who of these three people is responsible? And it's all of them.
Yes.
And it's such a unique ending. I even now, I'm not quite sure I can sort of parse it apart in my head because it's just, I don't think it wants you to, honestly.
But when I first saw it, I almost flew out of my chair. I think it is so effective. And, without spoiling it too much, I'm an atheist, so it shouldn't work on me. I don't believe in that stuff one little bit, but there is a sense of absolute evil that comes out of the film as it gets towards the ending that is incredible.
And another thing with like Na Hong-Jin, especially when you're looking at his short, the Red Snapper, or even The Chaser, it's very nihilistic. Like, there's no happy endings here. Everyone's fucked. Like, don't be expecting it. And they lived happily ever after. And that's one thing I really like about possession movies, but also is very typical of folk horror as well. I don't want a happy ending.
Yes.
Like, I'm not a bad person. I just don't want a happy ending. Like,
I don't even know how you'd get one, to be honest. Just everything goes badly.
Yeah.
I mean, it touches so many touchstones of things that sort of reset the situation to zero and make everybody happy and everything normal again. And everything goes wrong every single time. It's like basically a gang of them turn up with like pokers and, torches. Goes horribly wrong. It introduces the zombie idea there. It introduces the shaman. Well, he's not as good as he seems to be, is it? And it talks about doctors, and that goes horribly wrong. It's just, he keeps on giving you these little ways out, and he says, no, you're not having that. This is horrible.
It's interesting looking at it in historical terms, as Ygraine mentioned, the Japanese occupation of Korea that ended in 1945. There did seem to be a blip of movies around 2016 or so that addressed that. Obviously, Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden is one of them. What was the film we did for Eclectica? Was it called The Age of Shadows?
That was a Kim Ji-woon spy movie, yes.
Yes, yeah, that was it. I don't know why there seemed to be something in the air in Korean cinema around that time, but I think it's interesting that they all replay that very differently. The Handmaiden politically it's as much of a hall of mirrors as its narrative. You can't get a bead on who the good people and who the bad people are in that film. Age of Shadows, I think, has its ambiguities and twists, but it's more of a straightforward kind of resistance to occupation movie. And then this puts it in the present day, and it's like, as I say, it is very hard to work out which way this movie is going to jump on the issue, which I think is... part of it is sort of like, maybe this is a new kind of horror, maybe this is sensitivity horror, where you're just watching it thinking, I hope this isn't going to do something really right-wing, and that becomes part of the unease of it.
The Craig Zahler situation. Where you think, he's a great new director. Oh, no, he's horrible and right-wing. Forget about it. It doesn't matter.
But this does it about as artfully as you can, in part because, there is no baseline of it. As we've said, there is no one kind of horror subgenre it fits in. There is no sort of, without wanting to sound too high flown, there is no sort of cosmology to it. You can't even say, it's an occult horror movie, so the occultist must be able to win the day in this one. It doesn't have a sort of stable ground floor in that way, which is very disconcerting. And it's kind of amazing that no one's really done it this thoroughly before. There are certainly horror movies where you don't know if it's going to be paranormal or not. But I've never seen a horror movie where there are 5 or 6 conflicting worldviews and you just don't have a guide as to which one of them is right.
Yeah. To loop around to the character work again, because that is a defining thing of Korean cinema. The lead character, again, is a policeman, and he doesn't like policemen because this guy, he's essentially established as a bit of a coward. There's a scene at the beginning in which he's attacked by an elderly woman, and he's on the floor screaming and crying. And that's one of the things that people don't like about this movie. There seem to be a fine objection with the idea that characters scream when they're scared, which is such a weird stance to take.
If I was in this movie, I would scream and scream and fucking scream.
This guy, this lead, he's not heroic. He's very cowardly. He responds in the worst way possible in every situation that arises. But at the same time, you kind of like him. He's down to earth. You understand where he's coming from, even though he's doing everything wrong. Even his reactions to things. It's a great scene at the beginning, one of the very few comedic, openly comedic scenes, where him and his partner are in the police station at night, and the thunder and lightning going off, and there's a naked woman, or what you can see is a naked woman at the door, and he just absolutely loses it. It's a great moment, but again, you just like him. I think that's a neat trick when you're basically using him as a tool to whip the police, but still you like him.
Yeah, it's definitely a pushback against that Hollywood. I mean, if we think about Seven, gorgeous, Brad Pitt, enigmatic, Morgan Freeman, very, very suave, very, almost kind of like this detective noir. They're not real people. I've been around police people. That's not what they're like. They are gobshites. They are like cowards. They're pretty much forced into this vocation when is it the right vocation for them? No. And that's why I not necessarily like the character, but I can definitely
you believe in him.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a better way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be a sort of that there is a certain strain of Korean cinema that likes doing this, going back, I guess, to some of the early Bong Joon-ho films like Memories of Murder, where they're very invested in undercutting that idea of the perfect macho, capable, professional protagonist. And I think it's always fun. I think it's always a really interesting subversive sensibility, but here it just adds to that feeling that there is no up and down in this world, that if this movie did have a sort of Brad Pitt type as its lead, you would instantly think, well, I know what kind of movie this is going to be. It must be whatever movie he thinks it is because he's the hero. But this is very much in that Bong Joon-ho vein of just because you're in a really grave situation doesn't mean you're not going to suddenly do just the dumbest thing imaginable.
Yeah, and he's relatable because of that.
Yeah,
it's the same with both of his leads in this and The Chaser. You might not like them, but you can relate to them, and I think that's very important when the situations they go through to sort of keep it grounded. Because I think the thing that works most for this is, even with its many, many, many flights of fantasy, it still feels very real.
Yeah.
It's kind of a very weird balancing act, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody do in a movie this audacious and it still feel like it's set in the real world.
Yeah.
You sort of come to believe in a shamanic exorcism as being quite a pragmatic thing to do in the circumstances, don't you?
Yeah. And even the shaman is not what a movie shaman would be. A movie shaman it's a caricature. It's a big silly thing. But this guy, he's a businessman. He's you see him putting tracksuits on to go out and have a jog. He's a character rather than just an archetype, a stereotype,
that is
a cipher.
Yeah.
And again, it's the magic trick of how he makes us feel real and so weird and out there at the same time. Yeah, I thought somebody would pick up off that.
No, but it's I'm struggling to say things other than I think this is really great. I thought this was incredible when I first watched it, and watching it again has just made me more conscious of all of the ways in which it manages this balancing act that should not be possible at all.
Yeah, and the characters too. Yun Kunimura, I think I've got the name right, who plays the Japanese man. He's terrifying despite not really doing anything, just standing there and looking. At the time of doing this movie, I think he has 146 acting credits.
Wow, man knows what he's doing.
This is a guy who's been around and then some, but yeah, he's incredible despite doing nothing.
Yeah, well, he has that way of like, because we're being caused to question what are his motives, what is he there for, he has that way of being menacing, but then he looks very innocent and very like almost shocked at what's happening and kind of like, oh, here we go again, I'm a Japanese man in Korea, of course, and that is what keeps us guessing. His performance is what keeps us guessing, because even just little things like facial expressions, I was kind of intently watching his performance, and his micro expressions are so subtle, but he goes from like creepy and possible demonic guy to them being like looking like this frail old man who has been wrongly convicted of these terrible things. And I think that's the type of performance he gives, and what Na Hong-Jin has brought out of him was amazing.
Yeah, I think this, the whole cast is good, but if there is one performance where you can say the movie would not work as well with anyone else in that role, it's him, because he's really got the burden of the entire movie's ambiguity on its back. Every time the tone changes, he has to be at the centre of it.
And the little girl deserves her plaudits, I feel, as well. But again, that's another one of the stick by which people who don't like this beat the movie, because it's such a screamy performance. But again, it goes back to that reality of it. Yeah. It's a small girl who's basically suffering great torture and pain, both physical and mental. What else? How else is she supposed to react?
Plus, also, have you met little kids? They are screamy and screechy anyway, without being demonically possessed,
Oh, yeah, but she puts in like a proper... I can't remember the name of the character. It's Reagan. Is it Reagan in The Exorcist?
Yes, yeah.
It's been years since I've seen it, but she puts in a proper little foul-mouthed performance as well. She just the start is that good and a bit, really sweet little girl, and she's got a gutter mouth. It's great. But I think... This is anything that's we haven't mentioned that either you'd like to bring up regarding the Conjuring? No, not the Conjuring. Where does that come from? The Wailing.
One comparison point that didn't strike me when I first watched it is that this is basically what we all sort of expected season 1 of True Detective to be, right? So I don't know if this is a reference point that's going to hit with you, Rob, but when that first season of True Detective with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson was on, people were like checking out the references to classic weird horror fiction and all of the sort of vaguely occult insinuations in it and say, this is amazing. They've sold it as a cop show, but it's actually a kind of Lovecraftian weird fiction series. And in the end, it wasn't that. And it was still good, I thought, but it wasn't like the Trojan horse cosmic horror that people were really hoping it would be. And I think if you did feel let down by how that season ended, The Wailing delivers more than you could ever have thought possible.
That's a good comparison.
mean, personally, for me, I'm totally on board with this movie. It's become one of my favourite horror movies since the first time I saw it. So, yeah, it offers so much on repeat viewings. And even the idea of a repeat viewing to be okay for a movie which is 2 hours and 38 minutes long is considerable because, like Ygraine, I don't think any movie should be over 2 hours. That's just silly talk.
I mean, 2 hours and 38 is Kubrick length, right? We're getting into that territory.
I imagine he'd be a better director to work for, though. He doesn't seem like the sort of person who would want you to do 40 takes of walking through a door and pissing off Harvey Keitel. It seems a bit more rough and ready around the edge. I mean, very deliberate and well considered and made, but his performances he get that seem a little less pristine, a little more ramshackle, a little bit more raw, and I think that just works so well for it.
Yeah.
Okay. So at this point of the show, this is a real conundrum that I've got myself in here. At this point of the show, I say, okay, so we've talked about his filmography and movies that he's done elsewhere, but we haven't talked about. So what do we think about his career in a whole? Well, this is a guy who's done 3 features, produced and wrote one.
And we've done like 2/3 of his directorial output right now on this show.
But the medium is very, very much worth checking out. It's
okay.
Great, properly hysterical found footage. I mean, hysterical as in it goes full hysteria rather than it's very, very funny.
Yeah.
Okay, just make that distinction. So I guess the question is, what do you think's in the future for him, really? Because he's so early in his career. What do you think lies ahead for a guy who makes films like this? If that's even answerable, I don't know. Honestly.
One of the things that, I'm not sure I can answer it, but one of the things that gives me hope is that he hasn't rushed into something new after this. And I think there's something exciting about a director who will do that. Don't get me wrong, I like, people like Herzog who just knock off 3 films before breakfast. I think that's fun as well. But when you've made something that is so ambitious and so successful as The Wailing, to just sit back and say, you know what, I'm going to do something else when it's right, I think is a power play. I really respect that.
I hope he's not rushed into going to Hollywood. I think I would love to see him explore more of this Korean culture, whether it is, the culture that surrounds its serial killers or its folk rural culture like he did, even though it was set in Thailand, the medium and The Wailing does. I think where a lot of, when say like Park Chan-wook did his first American, it was Stoker, and it just didn't mesh well. So I really hope that Na Hong-Jin stays truly Korean. Because I think he's given a fascinating insight to this culture, this history, this everyday life of Korea, and putting it into a horrific form. And that's what I want to see more of.
Yeah, I think the current crop of Korean directors have been very good, in my opinion, about knowing when to go international. None of them have hurried into it. I think I like Stoker a bit more than you, but it's also the case that by the time Park Chan-wook did that, his career wasn't resting on this. It wasn't like if he went to America and the movie wasn't good, it wasn't like that would destroy his career. And the same thing with Bong Joon-ho, who went and made 2 very eccentric big studio films with ensemble star casts and then just went back home and had the biggest hit of his career.
I
it's
think
thrilling.
On that though, Kim Ji-woon's experience is the real teller there, because he went over to America and made an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, The Last Stand. That might colour that for new directors, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. I think the thrilling thing about it is that you no longer need to do it. There was a time when if you wanted to be a major international director, you had to at least co-produce or play nice with the Hollywood industry. And for Koreans, at least, that clearly isn't true anymore.
Yeah, they're making some great TV as well. So it's a industry on fire, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't really add more to that. Perfectly put from the 2 of you.
Thank you.
You ever been in this room before? No.
You feel like you have?
Why would I?
I know you feel out of place, like your life isn't your own.
You don't know me.
This is all of the evidence seized last Thursday night. We believe this is the man that murdered Harold Slade and Shane Fisher.
You knew one of his victims. If there's a link, we'll find it.
Tell me, what am I missing?
There's no pattern, it's just chaos.
You can prove it to yourself, Lucy. Think.
Harold Slade, I know that name means something to me.
Remember!
That will take us to the final part of the show, which I will have to lean on the pair of you because I've been in a heavy podcasting cycle. So what other things we have been watching? Besides, it can be TV, movies. Hell, there's a podcast, which I know a lot of people are listening to. I've got a lot of nice things to say about from a certain Mr. Pale. So, really, the floor is yours, whatever you want to talk about.
Ygraine, do you want to jump in first, or shall I?
You go first.
Okay. Well, normally on this, I like to do one thing that I've watched for the Geek Show website and one thing that I've watched just off duty, as it were. And the thing that I've watched for review that I want to talk about is Eureka's new Blu-ray of Son of the White Mare by Marcel Jankovic, which is not a film I was familiar with before, although when I saw parts of it in action, I did suddenly think, oh yeah, that's where that Letterboxd friend of mine got his user picture from. Because it is the sort of movie that once you watch it, you will happily make it your entire personality. What I loved about the disc set is that it is a good overview of Jankovic's career as well. It includes 3 of his early shorts, one of which, Sisyphus, was Oscar nominated. And also a whole extra feature film, the fabulously titled Johnny Corncob, which is based on a Hungarian nationalist poem that I have to shamefully admit I was unfamiliar with, which he directs in the style
Shamefully? Okay.
I know, yes. But he directs it in the style of Yellow Submarine, and I cannot imagine what that's like for Hungarian audiences. It must be like sort of watching Last Night of the Proms redone by Terry Gilliam or something.
You just made that sound fabulous, though. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. And what a guy he was too, because there'll be some people, I'm sure, listening to this thinking, does Hungary have an animation industry? And the answer is, before Marcel Jankovic, the answer was no. He was the Hungarian animator when he started off. Johnny Corncob was the first feature-length animated film made in Hungary. And I have to say, if you give me a choice between the first animated feature film made in America, which was Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and the first animated feature film made in Hungary, I'd have to say the Hungarians are winning out for me, because Johnny Corncob is an outrageous, bawdy, psychedelic, satirical. And have you ever do people know what I mean when I say picaresque? Is this just one of those terms that I'm obsessed with, or does it mean...
It's mostly you, but...
Okay, fair. There's this mode in, Renaissance and early sort of modern literature called picaresque, where it's like sort of Pilgrim's Progress or Don Quixote. It's a series, a sort of road trip movie before there were cars, basically. Just a sort of roguish anti-hero traveling towards something and getting in all sorts of bizarre scrapes as he does so. You can think in the picaresque mode in film, you might think of something like Karel Zeman's The Fabulous Baron Munchausen, which Johnny Corncob reminded me of a lot. It's sort of not something you see often in movies because it goes so completely counter to that idea of good 3-act screenwriting. But when you see someone who is mad enough to just make a picaresque movie entertaining for an hour and a half, despite the fact that it has no sort of single plot going through it, it's a magical thing. And I was dazzled by it. I mean, he is the sort of animator who really enjoys doing things that just wouldn't be possible in any other medium. And I really value that.
Interesting. Ygraine, anything?
So I'm going to do a bit of a three-parter, a TV, a film, and a podcast. So TV, Amazon Prime, The Devil's Hour, starring Peter Capaldi. It is a crime-ish TV show, crime-ish. I'm kind of halfway through at the moment. I interviewed one of the lead characters and the director at Fright Fest this year, and they were like, oh, it starts off like a typical procedural and then it will go and blow your mind. So I'm not quite at the blow the mind bit yet, I'm hoping. But Peter Capaldi, as always, is amazing. Creepy, cold, everything you kind of look for in a good antagonist, I guess. Film-wise, I recently watched The Menu, starring Ralph Fiennes. It's an amazing commentary on how class rich people have kind of gentrified food and cooking, and it takes it into a really twisted place. And Anna Taylor-Joy is fantastic as always. It's very typical, but it's an enjoyable typical look. Kind of. I mean, it says here, I'm looking at it at the kind of little blurb, and it says it's a black comedy horror. I don't think I'd go so far as saying it's comedic. But sure, Nicholas Hoult as well is amazing as the most annoying person on earth. But I would definitely recommend it for anyone going to the cinema. Podcast-wise, Quiet Part Loud, that has been produced by Jordan Peele's Monkey Paw. It is a fantastic look at conspiracy stories post 9/11, especially when it concerns the Muslim community in America. And it does a lot with its sound design, which I really appreciate. One of my degrees is in music technology and audio communication. So it's perfect for putting on, in the dark when you're lying in bed and listening to the sound with both earphones on. And it's a real experience, not just for the storyline, which is amazing, but also for the auditory experience as well. So I would definitely recommend that for people.
It's been a while since I've listened to a storytelling podcast. I think it was
I
was burnt out by the one that should I do, The Darkest Hour. There was an episode of that which is just hearing gore isn't quite the same as seeing it.
See, I wouldn't really be into like story podcasts. I'm more of like a true crime kind of person, but this has really got me hooked.
Okay. I'll do me two things I've watched before Graham loops around to his second, and they're both TV shows. I've only seen the first episode of it so far, but so far it's entirely my jam. It's a series on Netflix called 1899.
Yeah.
Basic setup is a ship goes missing in the middle of the Atlantic, and the trek from England to New York follows in their footsteps, and they get a signal in the middle of their journey, and it's from the previous ship. And they turn up at the ship, and nobody is there. So it's got that. I guess it's sort of leaning towards aquatic horror. And I don't think there's enough good of that. It's one of those sort of subgenres of horror which I really, really like, despite me knowing I really should know better because so much of it is bad, unfortunately. Let's be fair. So I'm liking where it's going. It's very classy, sort of like studio horror used to be before studio horror changed what it meant. How would I put this? More Omen, less Smile, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And the other thing was on Netflix, and they changed the title of it because apparently they must have had complaints. It was originally called The Bastard Son and the Devil Himself, but now they've changed it to Half Bad. So,
that's not as good.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward sort of witchy story, in which the son of, well, it's about two witches, Fairborns and Half-Bloods. I think that's the term. And essentially, they're at war with each other, and the ones that you think are good aren't good. The ones you think are bad are not quite so bad. Pretty straightforward. The reason why I watched it, I've forgotten his name off the top of my head. One of the principal creators is the director of a movie that I liked about the same time that The Wailing came out, funnily enough, The Girl with All the Gifts.
Oh, right.
Which is a movie way too many people slept on. I thought that was a really cool little sci-fi horror about nature taking over again.
I was really pleased when I watched Horror Noir, the Shudder documentary, and they were talking about the girl with all the gifts a lot, and I thought, yes, thank you.
But the thing in this, which makes it sort of earn its generous spots, is its superpowers, its witch powers. You sort of arbitrarily earn one. I don't know what the word is, not earn. You have one, and there's no sort of real process about deciding what it is. You just sort of have it, and that's it. It can be growing plants, or it can be one thing called decimation, which basically means with the power of magic, you can basically pull another human apart at a cellular level.
Right.
And it's kind of like that gun scene in Videodrome.
Nice.
And that happens 3 times, and you're watching it and think, hang on.
Yeah.
He's coming apart by the seams here. Oh my God, that's really gory. And it does it 3 times, and wow, it's just...
Yeah.
There's a movie called Nicholas Roeg movie. I've got the right Nicholas, haven't I? Yeah, called Eureka, in which one of the characters dies, and when he's finished dying, he basically looks like a mural, like bit of modern art on the floor. This is exactly the same gross bit of gore. Which, you didn't know Netflix had it in them, really, to do that sort of thing, because their horror stuff, English language horror stuff, I should specify, is quite tame.
Yeah.
So that's me. That's the 2 things that I've been watching.
I'd forgotten we could do TV, so before I do my last film, I just want to chuck in a quick mention. I finally started watching the BBC sitcom Ghosts, which is delightful. It's by the team who did Horrible Histories, and it's pitched as like... It's not quite their break at doing adult stuff, but they said they wanted to do a sitcom that reminded them of like staying up late as a kid to watch Blackadder or The Young Ones, where you're aware it's not for you, but kids love it anyway. And I think it works really well on that level. It's like, I like a few sort of the more dramatic comedies we've had recently. I'm very fond of Mae Martin's comedy drama Feel Good, but sometimes I actually want to watch a comedy where there's big proper jokes and it's not just an exploration of trauma with some sad indie on the soundtrack. I want to watch people dick around and make a fool of themselves. And the thing that I love so much about Ghosts is it has this absolutely stacked cast. There's 7, I think about 7 principal ghosts and some more who are just peripheral as well as the living in it. And every episode, they all get something really funny to do. And I'm just in awe of the kind of juggling act that kind of writing takes. It's lovely stuff. And Katie Wicks as Mary, the witch trial victim, is amazing. She's so good in it.
I was going to watch, just an aside before you do your other thing, I was going to watch Inside Number 9, but they removed all of it from iPlayer.
What?
That's Dirty Dogs. So
yeah,
that's not an option anymore, apparently.
Streaming's great, isn't it? Way of the future. As for the other film, Rob, if I said I'd watched a film called Kung Fu Master, which director do you think I would have been?
I have no idea. There's too many. They all bleed into one another. Put me out of misery, please.
You'd probably be going for quite a while before I said Agnes Varda, right?
Yeah, I would never get there. I'd never decide on a French neo-realist.
She can be, yeah. I mean, Vagabond, which she made just a few years before this, is absolutely sort of hard Scrabble, disturbing social realist stuff, yeah. And this one begins with a teenage boy walking through the streets, daydreaming about duffing people up with the power of kung fu. So she's versatile, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This is part of a big slew of Agnes Varda films that have been on Mubi for ages. I'd watched a couple of them, but they are, to bring it back to the unfairness of the streaming world, they are removing most of them soon. So I thought, right, get round to them. And this is one of the ones I've loved the most. And it's weird because it's one of the few Agnes Varda films I think people have real trouble with, largely because of the central relationship, which is in that kind of uncomfortable licorice pizza vein of the sort of adult woman and the underage boy.
Yeah, that was kind of creepy in licorice pizza.
It's weird because in some ways Kung Fu Master is kind of more off-putting for that, because the kid does look like a kid rather than Cooper Hoffman, who's about 12 feet tall. But I think what rescues it is that it's very much Agnes Varda's home movie. She'd done a documentary about Jane Birkin, the film's female lead, and this just came up during conversation as like a movie that they'd like to do. So she started filming it, and Charlotte Gainsbourg, Jane Birkin's also very famous daughter, appears in it. Gainsbourg said the shooting schedule was an absolute pain in the ass, that she had Agnes Varda just sleeping on the floor of her bedroom for like a solid year, and it was really getting on her nerves. But you'd never know from the finished film, which is really kind of light and charming and bittersweet, and I think avoids being creepy largely because it is so easy to see this as just Agnes Varda and Jane Birkin and their friends and family playing dress up. I mean, the kid in it, most obviously, is Matthew Demy, the son of Agnes Varda and Jacques Demy, and he looks exactly like a sort of Photoshop of both of his parents. Like, you cannot fail to see them in his face. And so it's very easy to just disconnect from it. And just as I was starting to think, is it me or is this kind of winning me over? They make a trip to Britain to meet Jane Birkin's character's family, which results in what I'm pretty sure is the only clip of A Bit of Fry and Laurie ever to feature in a French New Wave film. Good to have that in your back pocket for a pub trivia quiz. What is the link between Cleo from 5 to 7 and Stephen Fry?
That is a really weird pub quiz you're going to, if that's a question, Graham. Let's be honest. But she's an absolute sweet. This is a woman who was a star on Instagram in her 90s. So
yes, people on Instagram went wild for her oddly shaped potatoes.
Which is an odd sentence out of context, isn't it?
It's an odd sentence in context. But it's the sort of thing where if you watch one of her films, you do sort of think, oh yeah, of course, this is like the nonagenarian French art house director who became a big hit on Instagram. There's just, because she's so charming, she's absolutely, like, whether she's on screen or not, there is a magnetic charm to all of her films.
And on a nice note to end like that, after 2 movies of pure horrible nihilism, that's a good way to end, I think. So, Ygraine, where can we find you and your work online?
You can find me hopefully still on Twitter. Eyebrow raise at what_scream, and I do lots of writing for Ghouls magazine and The Geek Show and Moving Pictures Film Club. You can find all my writings on there, and you can find my podcast What a Scream anywhere you listen to podcasts, basically.
And Graham?
My regular berth is Pop Screen, the Geek Show podcast dealing with pop stars in the movies. We are just finessing an episode, our Christmas episode, about Whitney Houston in The Bodyguard.
That's way too mainstream, Graham, I'm sorry.
Okay, we also did a documentary about the Velvet Underground by Todd Haynes. Are you happy now?
There we go, that's the right level of obscure I expect from you.
Yes. So that's my day job, as it were. I write for The Geek Show, Byline Times, looking for a few new places. I must say, I used to write for Horrified, but it closed down, sadly.
So that was sad, yeah.
Yeah, hunting for somewhere new, but you can find me on Letterboxd just under Graham Williamson, and on Twitter and Instagram at Graham W Film.
And you can find me across social media to keep up to date with everything that's happening on the show, and by searching for Uncut Robcast on all of them. Twitter, Mastodon, Instagram, Hive. Never Facebook though. Never ever Facebook. But yes, until next time, this has been Directors Uncut.